good and bad, it's so subjective. And I think this is actually a good point of beginning, if you guys are comfortable with start at this point, that a lot of what we're going through right now as a society is, again, I go back to what we were talking about last time. It's the matter of this alignment issue, an alignment challenge, or whatever you want to call it, that there is a narrative that is being offered, basically, or demanded maybe by a centralized structure of authority, whether it's a government or an agency or a department or a local government or anything like that. And people have their own interpretation of it because of the social media, because of, people just talk to each other and they come to different kind of a conclusion. And I think this is an inherent addition of our time that is expanding this gap that has existed between us further and further.
Who is us here? Between us who?
Us humans. What is the big picture?
You're lumping all humanity into one pile?
Well, in one pile of disagreeing with each other. Absolutely.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yep.
Because what is that one objective, big picture wise, that the entire humanity is following? This is something I actually asked Michio Kaku, whether or not we can consider type 1 civilization based on Kardashev's scale as some kind of an objective scale, that we become a planetary civilization, because we're not even type 1 now, we're type 0. But
were we ever type 1 and we regressed, or we haven't got there
no
yet?
We haven't got to type 1 yet.
Okay.
So Michio Kaku was saying that this is actually the most sensitive and risky kind of a situation to transfer from type 0 to type 1. We're either going to make it or we're going to destroy ourselves.
Right.
But at the same time, a lot of the addition required to become type 1 civilization are a lot of things that we are arguing against right now. This kind of monopolized narrative, for example, on climate, or monopolized narrative on taxation, monopolized narrative on culture, on values.
Right.
Well, yeah.
But what defines a type 1 civilization?
So type 1
this scale.
Type 1 civilization is a planetary civilization that would use all the resources of the planet, basically, in order to be able to use them for whatever kind of objective that we have. So whether all the elements of the planet, basically. So we are not that at this point, because we're using dead plants and dead animals, which is oil and gas and carbon, as a source of energy. By the time we get to a point that we can, again, we're already in a very controversial kind of area, because some people would say, aha, he's a globalist because he's advocating for controlling the weather, which is true, but at the same time, you don't want like a single government to be in charge of the weather.
Well, some people do. Some people want a global government. That is their end game.
Yeah, and that's a problem, right?
Right.
This is
that is one way forward, is to have a monoculture, a global culture that is the same everywhere.
Well, we're working on that one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not our culture.
Well, what is our culture? What is our culture? You're talking about the Western culture.
As one example, correct.
Right. Who do you think is doing a better job at this point establishing that one culture or one
I hate
civilization?
to use the word better in that sentence, but I think the CCP is pushing pretty hard at promoting their version of reality.
Yeah.
And we seem to be, when our prime minister proclaims that he envies what the CCP is doing and how they're doing it, then you have to sort of sit back in your chair and go, really? I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, basic dictatorship.
I mean, that's the right answer. I'm not sure he grasps that or views it that way, but that's my interpretation of what he said.
What do you think, David?
Would you say CCP is the largest single culture in the world today in terms of people? Like you wouldn't say that Western culture is a single culture, would you? Or do you put that at the same level as
Well, I think Judeo-Christian, if you put it in that label, then that you raise it to that abstraction, then we're a pretty large entity. I don't know, what would the numbers look like compared to China?
Judeo-Christian is over 2 billion and CCP is under 2 billion.
But CCP is not a culture. CCP is a gang, basically, that has taken over a country. And the nationalist Chinese who fled China to Taiwan, those are the people who inherit the Chinese culture that goes back 5,000 years or whatever. So CCP's culture is a politically driven culture of domination. That's what it is. And because of the kind of technology and the will and the ability to use the technology, there is a very good chance that they can dominate. I don't want to say the entire of the globe, but most of the globe, with the same kind of outreach that they've practiced very successfully within mainland China.
And yeah, I just think back at university now in retrospect, and it was happening then in the 70s already. That sort of indoctrination was going on at all sorts of levels, which is why we have the social crisis we do in the West now, because that embracing of communism and socialistic ideologies, aka postmodern, aka Marxism, has really just become a subtext to so much of our civilization. And I don't think most people realize how it's been inculcated in so much of our civilization, and what the consequences are. I mean, I talk to the people I talk to, and the comments I see just on Facebook and around, and you talk to people. I don't think most people get what's going on. I think there is a bit of an awakening now with what's happening with Antifa and the riots, and people are sort of stepping back and going, really? I mean, this doesn't make sense. But I'm not sure how many people actually get the underpinnings that are in place that support this sort of narrative. I mean, it's really deeply steeped in our society. And I'm not sure how you unpack that anymore. That's my biggest concern now. Can this be taken apart and the good parts kept? I mean, because there's I mean, we have to look after each other, that's, for sure, but I don't know if we can unpack this in a civilized way, unravel it without battlegrounds being laid and just you'd hate to use the word civil war, but there are hints of that possibility in the way this is playing out. It's going to be very important for whoever gets elected in the US, I think predominantly, because Europe is somewhat lost, to be able to set a tone and most importantly, be able to set a tone in a way that everyone can be part of. And I'm not sure how to do that, how that can be done at this point. But short of that, I think, China is going to get more and more traction as their propaganda. I mean, we were looking at those stories earlier where, CBC and The Guardian are all saying Russia is invading, our research into the COVID vaccines. But maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but they're probably the least of our concerns in terms of people that are actually doing that, right?
Yeah.
And to what end? And nowhere in those narratives does it talk about, are they doing any damage? I mean, we probably should be sharing that kind of research around the world if we're succeeding. But my biggest concern was if they're sabotaging any of it, by playing with data. But no one even casually mentions that risk. So Russia keeps getting pushed up as the villain, and I find it astounding, utterly astounding, that no one is publicly stepping up and in the mainstream and calling China out. And every time Trump does, he's vilified.
Well, that's one of the reasons that they are not talking about China, is because Trump is talking about it. I don't know if you saw today that Nancy Pelosi called COVID Trump virus.
I did.
Which is just mind-blowing.
Well, but then you saw that on Church of the Virus there, I posted a link on from MedCram, and the opening tagline was CCP virus explained, and someone was really, mocking me and just shaking his head at me for using that term. So you're not allowed to pick on China, apparently.
Well, I'll tell you this. Oh, David, do you have any kind of perspective on this before I get into my perspective?
Yeah.
Hurry up, David! Quick, something. Don't let him get rolling again.
I defer to you. I want to hear your perspective.
Okay, I'm not gonna let this go now.
The floor is yours.
Well, I think it's very clear why people are not talking about China is because they're invested in what China represents, which is providing a low regulation kind of a ground, so you can do whatever you want to do. You don't have to treat your workers well. You don't have to pay them well. You can use slave labor and just make money basically out of the entire, operation. And a lot of people within United States, not only media and a lot of people within the Democratic Party, but a lot of the media apparatus, they're heavily invested in this whole order that really has been established since after World War II, which is basically about mixing U.S. economy with global economy. That's what this whole thing has been all about. And at the same time, we're going through this cultural shift from having some kind of a set narrative based on very limited channels of interpretation and distribution of information to this explosion of platforms and ability for people to express themselves. And I feel like we're like monkeys given machine guns, and we're just going insane with the use of Twitter and different kind of social media. Now deep fakes are coming. We can, just make up stuff from scratch because, media and a lot of people are already doing it by editing videos in the way that they want to represent it. But when you can just make up something from scratch, something that has absolutely no basis on reality whatsoever, and half the population would believe it and make political decision on that basis, I think we're in complete uncharted territories. And regardless of whoever is going to be elected in November, it's going to be a complete mess. But the silver lining in all of this to me is that a lot of what we are relying on to evaluate whether as good or bad, they're not as solid as we think they are. Let's say, for example, the Democratic Party right now, that is practically a Trojan horse for whoever that is willing to join them against United States, which is, I think, my argument against the point you made, Fritz, that a lot of these people are not pro any specific kind of a system. They're against the system, and that is the capitalist, American, and as they put it, racist system of the West, that they see no value in it whatsoever because of whatever that they've learned and whatever that they believe. But it's not like they're hardcore communists or they're hardcore Marxists. There are people who are hardcore communists and hardcore Marxists among them. But my point is that this is a massive tent against America and against capitalism and against the West. And at the same time, on the other side of the equation, you see that Trump has created his own version of a massive and expanded tent against this narrative that no, America is good, we've achieved a lot, Western civilization is the most successful civilization in the world, it's pulled out majority of people out of poverty because of capitalism. And so I think Zizek said it best, that at this point, this is a moment of philosophy, that we are at the level that we were talking about. Hey, what do we need? What is the definition of civilization? What is the definition of a society? What are the values that worth, preserving, or we have the obligation of destroying? So that's what we are talking about. It's not like we are headed towards any kind of a specific direction in either way, whether against the West or for the West, in favor of CCP, which we are not. Majority of the world, including majority of the Chinese people, are not in favor of the CCP. But at the same time, if United States is so divided that you elect anybody in November 3rd or November 4th, and half the country will be like, it's not my president, I'm just not going to listen to this person, I don't care who he is, I'm not going to follow it. And we see the traces of it right now, that some states are saying, we don't care if you're going to send federal troops, we don't want them. Portland is saying it right now. Philadelphia said it yesterday. New York is saying it. Hey, you bring federal troops, we might end up arresting the federal troops. And that is exactly what will lead to civil war, quite possibly. And the gap that will be created as a result of this will be perfect for anybody to step in. It could be partially CCP, it could be partially Hezbollah and Iran, it could be partially Muslim Brotherhood, and it could be partially countless number of militias that already exist in the United States and take over this country. And basically, it's the end of United States as a union.
So going back to Portland, aren't there already federal agencies in Portland?
Yeah.
Like who are the ones that are in unmarked uniforms picking off protesters and throwing them in unmarked vans?
So actually, that is fake news. They are not unmarked uniforms.
Okay.
What they don't have is their names. They don't have name tags because they've been doxxed before.
I see.
And that is the game that is being played. That, oh, look, they're not identifying themselves, but they're not identifying themselves because they've been doxxed.
Okay, but are they feds?
Their homeland security and their feds defending the federal courthouse that these people have been trying to set on fire for days now. All right. I don't know if you saw the footage of some of these, I don't call them protesters. They're not even rioters. These are, I guess, insurgents, revolutionaries, because there's no point of discussion. There is no point of argument. The point of the revolution for them is the revolution. They want to topple the system. That's what they want. And let me actually share this link with you because I think this is interesting that we're talking about it right now. That this,
I think Portland is very interesting because this is how it could start. This could be, like, if that spreads to other cities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It could topple the U.S.
So this gentleman, he's president of Portland Police Union, who's been targeted in protests, and he said that the community has had enough. Now, he looks like a black American, but we don't know, because if he is going to vote for Joe Biden, then he will be considered black. If he's not voting for Biden, then he ain't black, according to Biden. Of course, we know that.
Correct.
But he has said the elected officials meaning the mayor and anybody who's allowing this insanity to go on. I believe today is the 55th day that this mess has been going on. He said that the elected officials have condoned the destruction and chaos at Turner. They have placed a political agenda ahead. ahead of safety and welfare of the community. This must stop. He has also said that this is no longer about George Floyd, racial equality, racial equity, social justice reform, or the evolution of policing. Turner said this is about violence, rioting, and destruction. Our city is under siege by rioters. And I think that's absolutely spot on. You know, and this is the head of the police union in Portland. So people who are watching what's going on, and there are a lot of them because there is nothing else to do right now in the United States other than watching stuff. You can't go out. There is a curfew in a lot of places, including Florida. They are watching this insanity. And people don't want that. People don't want their cities and their neighborhoods to be burned to the ground because of racism or whatever it is. You know, but this is a narrative that is going nowhere because they have redefined racism altogether. That any kind of a system that leads to this kind of an inequality, according to them, is nonsensical, you know, by design. It has to be toppled altogether. It has to be destroyed, and something else come in the place of it. So I totally agree with Fritz that there is no civil way to get out of this. And I don't know, but what I do know is that absolute majority of people are not in favor of it.
Well, how many people are actually actively part of this rioting? And I think that's probably the correct word, because it ain't protesting.
No.
Like what? I can never find what kind of numbers, because when I think back in the 60s, when all the riots were going on and, you know, half of LA gets burnt to the ground, or, you know, several city blocks get burnt to the ground, students get gunned down, you know, at university campuses. You had a sense of numbers and people and the protests. I mean, when you look at the marches, the million-man marches on Washington and the civil rights movement, it was very real. But what I see now is like something out of a video game where you're getting this very narrow, myopic view of what's going on. And do we have any handle on how many people are actually destroying everything for everyone else? And how much of this is because initially the media was just driving this. And then I think at some point the mainstream media clued into the fact that this was helping Trump. So now they backed way off, and you don't see a lot of this stuff.
Not all of them, though. They're capitalizing a lot on this fact that people coming in unidentified cars and just snatching people off the street. Nancy Pelosi called them Trump's stormtroopers.
Right, but that's the back end, right? They never show the Apple Store day before yesterday when, you know, the rioters were there. The actual riot, the stuff that, you know, that would drum up anti-rioter, that stuff's not. So there's always this backhanded stuff that's in the media now. If they can spin it as an anti-Trump thing, then it makes the news. But actually, you know, showing what's actually going on, the day-to-day, because there's a lot of looting and rioting still underway, and I don't see that in the media as.
No. Yeah, I don't know about the exact numbers, but I do know that a lot of people within the Democratic Party, and this is one of the reasons that I am not as terrified as I was maybe 2 months ago with respect to the prospect of Democrats winning in November, because the moment they win, their own civil war will continue, because this is not an ideologically unified group of people.
Yeah.
This is, again, a tent that has been set up around the animosity against Donald Trump. That's what it is. And GOP has the same problem too within the conservatives. Now we see, we have started to see a little traces of it, that a unity that exists within the GOP and conservatives and evangelicals, and you know, it's a big tent on the other side too. It is around the support of Trump. It's all about Trump. So good and bad and right and wrong and all of this is being defined on the basis of whether or not you support or oppose Trump. But I think they're playing an insane kind of a game And I don't know when they're going to wake up, because CNN's office in Georgia was firebombed, and they couldn't believe it. Some leftist publications' offices were firebombed. The far left mayor of Portland House is a target of the attack of the rioters. And this is the guy who has ordered the police in Portland just to stay put, don't do anything. Let them do whatever they want to do.
Well, it was interesting. I watched that video on Sunday on the grooming gangs in the UK. What happened in the last 10 years in the UK is what we're seeing here now, where the political correctness is now impacting law enforcement, it's impacting the judicial system, it's impacting the behavior of our elected people, and not in a good way. So it's about right. I've always noted that we're 5 to 10 years behind Europe in our social behavior. And so this is last 10 years, this has been unraveling in the UK, and now we're seeing it here. Because when you look back over the last 10 years, the riots in London, you know, the stuff that was going on in the UK in terms of people beating each other up and the police just stepping back, is what's happening here now. So it's yeah.
Oh, it's the same playbook. They're saying it very clearly. I don't know if you know this woman, Linda Sarsour, Linda Sarsour is a pawn of Muslim Brotherhood in United States. She's not even hiding it. She's a hardcore Marxist Muslim Islamist who is not in favor of two-state solution. She's in favor of one-state solution, and that one state is Palestine. And she was one of the organizers of Women's March, that all of these American women went with their pussy hats. Some of them wore U.S. flag as a headscarves, that people like me coming from that part of the world were like, are you out of your freaking mind? What are you doing? Don't you see the big picture here? But it's the same playbook. And they've said it repeatedly that we're the people who started the Arab Spring in the Middle East and Northern Africa some 10 years ago. Why can't we doing it right here in the United States? They're doing the same thing. The problem with the United States with all of this going on is that every single one of these actions are unconstitutional. And people are losing their minds because a lot of the lawmakers, and I'm talking about Republicans, who's supposed to be standing up for constitutional rights of American citizens, they're also sitting back very quietly, absolute majority of them, which reminded me of the Conservative Party in Canada, that instead of standing up for your principles and values, the solid ground that has basically preserved your validity to exist within this dynamic, they're giving it up all for the sake of public opinion, mob opinion, basically.
Well, the ability to dox people and destroy them on is unbelievable.
Yeah.
My summer reading was Don't Burn This Book and The Madness of Crowds. And so I plowed through those, which is more books than I normally read in a lifetime. But they're great bookends, those two books. And they have very different information, but very similar sensibilities and where they're coming from. And I mean, Douglas Murray he recants the story of 1990s where he went, when he was doing research for a university paper, and he went into London to the Communist Party headquarters and was invited and talked to the people, and being gay, he was potentially part of the solution. And they said in no uncertain terms in these meetings when Doug was there, Douglas Murray, that we've lost the working class in England. The working class don't support us anymore.
Right.
The working class have it too good. So we have to weaponize new people. And we're now targeting the feminist movement, the gay community, the trans community. We're targeting these people, and we're going to weaponize them to promote our cause. And it's come to pass. It's just so sobering to hear that, emphatically documented. And then at the time, I would have shaken my head and said, that's not possible in our system. Our democracy is way too strong to, but maybe that's one of the weaknesses of democracy. That because everyone's individual rights are so important, that leaves us vulnerable to divide and conquer. But I still keep thinking that the majority of the people in the United States, the majority of people in Canada, don't support what's going on.
No, they don't.
But you got a job.
This is the most surprising thing about the left is they've lost the working class. They divorced.
Yeah.
The left is divorced from the working class. Has that ever happened before in the history of leftist politics?
But the answer is in that, isn't it? I mean, the solution is that should be so obvious to the political people is right there. Yet they're playing into this small group of people that are driving the narrative.
But I mean, even this coalition that you mentioned, women, LGBTQ, trans, even that is not a solid kind of a coalition.
No, and Murray goes, that's what his book's about. He's showing how all these are fragmented and fighting each other.
Yeah. The letter that just came out, it was signed by a whole bunch of people.
Harvard.
Yeah, against cancel culture. Like J.K. Rowling has been hammering on this trans issue for quite some time, because this is very obvious that for the sake of ideology, you want to erase so much rights that women over many, many decades have fought for to gain. Basically overnight, you expect them to give it up for the sake of an ideology with some kind of a completely incoherent, obscure kind of an outcome. You don't know what you're going for. You know what you're running away from, but you have no idea what you're running towards. So,
well, I like Douglas Murray's analogy of we've all been on this train, we've all hashed this stuff out, and we've been streaming along, and finally we're pulling into the station. And we can all get off this ideological train and work on the solutions we've come up with. But instead of stopping the train, it's now full steam ahead into oblivion, and no one's had a chance to get off and benefit from all the things. I mean, when you look at what's happened in all the various aspects of our culture, the level of openness and inclusion is phenomenal. It's never been this great. And yet, everyone wants to dismantle it now. It's bizarre. And I agree with you that with no rhyme or reason, it's just destroy for destroying's sake. You look back at, I look back at the Russian Revolution and the turn of the century and what was going on in the Soviet Union. And I mean, by God, those people had a reason to be rioting and then with the same logic and the same narrative, we're now trying to destroy one of the best civilizations we've ever created. I mean, what happens if all the protesters lost their iPhones? They were turned off.
Right.
But no one's even suggesting a simple solution like that. Just throw a dampening field on the downtown area that they're occupied. Just put a dampening field on it and no phone reception anymore. And see how long this, they don't have to bring troops in and start, beating people up. Just use the technology against them.
They're bringing troops because local law enforcement are refusing to, because of the orders given to them by politicians, to keep this nonsense under control.
Now, is this all is this a Democratic plan to discredit Trump?
Yes,
that what the narrative?
Absolutely.
That's the narrative.
Because the cities that you're looking at who had riots, I believe 25 of them, 25 out of 26, they're Democrat run and progressive Democrat run. And you look at their district attorneys, a lot of people within their law enforcement and justice system. And when you go back to who supported their campaigns, many of them you get to George Soros. This is insane because it's a very clear kind of a plan. It's a very clear kind of an approach. They did it with climate. They did it in colleges and universities, and a lot of people raised red flags and alarm about it. Nobody cared about it. Like a bunch of kids just, it's not that important. Well, those kids who were yelling in colleges and universities and shutting down and silencing speakers who disagree with them, now they're controlling certain corporations and offices and taking over different kind of positions that are very, very effective. But it's also the media and big tech that all together, because these are not, they're headquartered in America, but they're not American companies. These are multinational companies owned by shareholders who are benefiting a lot from globalism. And there is no reason for them to supporting Trump. Otherwise, if you want to think about it, what Trump is proposing is far more in favor of the working class than the other way around, because the other way around is the reason that all of these jobs and manufacturing plants have been sent to China to begin with. And these are the people that are looting and destroying small businesses and making the argument that, no, you have to keep your business shut down. We don't want you to recover. Because if you recover, an economy does well, it's not going to be in favor of us. It's going to be in favor of Trump.
Well, so they're trying to recreate the impoverished class nationally.
I don't think they know what they're trying to do. They're trying to defeat Trump. That's the thing. Everything is about Trump. They want to defeat Trump. And it shows to me how desperate they are, that they're willing to go to this length just to remove this person. It's a very, very effective person. If you want to see things get even crazier than they're going to get naturally for the rest of the year, just wait until Trump perhaps get the third pick of the Supreme Court if something happens to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is now again dealing with cancer. Can you imagine that in the middle of all of this? Because, hey, we are entering a hurricane season. We already entered hurricane season, but hurricanes usually hit the parts of the United States that usually get hit by hurricanes, including Florida, around September, which is right before the election.
Right. But even if she died tomorrow, there's no chance of confirming another Supreme Court justice before the election.
Mitch McConnell said he would do it.
Interesting.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell last year said if there is a vacancy, because I don't know if you remember, but he did not allow Obama to fill the Supreme Court vacancy because it was the election year in 2016, which was probably the most effective thing he's done ever in his entire life. And
maybe.
Yeah. And he said it last year. They asked him a question, are you going to do it? He said, absolutely, they're going to do it. And they can do it because they have majority in the Senate.
Is that all they need?
Yep.
But when you dispassionate, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to mention that they can't do it because of the rule that Democrats put in place that you don't need 60. Basically, they got rid of they call something. They went in favor of something called nuclear option, that you don't need 60 votes, you only need 51 votes to pass judicial appointments for Obama, because the Republican-led Senate wasn't going along with them. And Republicans were not going along with them, so they lowered the requirement to 51 instead of 60 people in the Senate, so they can just pass the judicial nominees. And when Republicans got a hold of Senate, they lowered that standard for Supreme Court nominees as well. So they only need 51. That's how they pass Gorsuch. That's how they pass Kavanaugh, and that's how they will be able to pass. It's going to be a woman. Amy Coney Barrett, I think, is the next in line, who's going to replace whoever is going to be the vacancy in the Supreme Court.
But, when I watch Robert Barnes on talk shows, the American civil rights lawyer, he talks about, he doesn't understand what the Democrats or anyone on that side of the house is talking about, because the judges have been, have been really good decisions that the judges that Trump's put in place.
Yeah.
And they aren't nearly as partisan as everyone says they are.
No, they're not.
So in far less partisan. That's really interesting, that sort of contrast. And,
well, I mean, when they were protesting outside of the Supreme Court, when Kavanaugh's name was announced as the nominee, they already had everything ready with just the name spot being blank. So we're against blank. I'll just fill it in, Brett Kavanaugh. They even sent a bunch of letters to some places with X instead of a name. They just forgot to remove it because it has nothing to do with logic, reason, rationality. It has everything to do with partisanship and tribalism. And
but like, it just seems, we're talking about all the ideologies and all that, but at a grassroots level, you got to put food on the table. You got to have a job. You got to get stuff done. If anything, the virus has shown us that, we have to get on top of what we produce locally on essential stuff. Certainly, there's no reason we can't produce all the PPE equipment that we need locally. And that would be a narrative. Just get her done, do it locally, build stuff, make stuff, get people working together, look at what industries or community can set up that works on a community level. All that would all be such a positive way to approach this. Small business based, but I don't see anyone talking in those terms. But to be fair, the one person who, of all the people that you'd least expected, has been Doug Ford, our premier in Ontario, has actually been, speaking that and doing it. But I'm missing that in the US. I see it happening at some levels, and it may be happening, you just don't hear about it. I don't know.
Well, they cannot talk about it because it is the people who are involved within the establishment right now who are responsible for sending all the jobs basically to China, for making United States dependent. 95+% of antibiotics in United States is coming from China. Right? So the situation is insane. And because these people are benefactors and beneficiaries, basically, of this entire globalism, that, hey, we want slave market without any kind of a regulation so we can produce cheap and sell for much, much more.
But I'm still, I hear that, and I don't argue against it, but the long game would leave North America without a revenue stream for most people to buy the products.
Yes, absolutely.
So then what, right? It seems, it almost, you mentioned the name earlier, but it almost looks like someone who's shorting the U.S. economy, and a bunch of people are shorting it, which, that there's been a history of people wanting to do that. I happen to follow what went on with Elon Musk and Tesla, and the billions of dollars that have been put in shorting Tesla.
Yeah. And
they've lost, consistently lost every year now for the last 10 years. And they've tried really, really hard to slag, put them down, and they still can't create a situation where their short puts make any money. They've lost millions of dollars. So there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes that make a difference.
Hey, people notice. People notice. Let me share with you something they actually shared with you guys yesterday. This is really, really interesting. And this is by Eric Weinstein. This is not a right-wing insane person. Let's see if I can't find it here.
Depends who you ask.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You're right. Let me see if I can find.
I'm a big fan of the portal.
Yeah.
Yes. Very interesting perspective.
Well, his walking rant on racism.
Right.
That was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
He's spot on.
That should have been mandatory viewing everywhere. And yeah, I don't know how much traction it got. I certainly passed it around to everyone, and everyone that I passed it to was blown away.
Well, I can't share it with you guys, but I'm just going to read it to you. I shared it with you, the link yesterday on Facebook, but I'm just going to read it. He tweeted, this is July 20th, I guess like a day, 2 days ago, that a surprising number of left-leaning people are confiding to me that they are planning to vote for Trump for two different stated leading reasons. A, Biden's mental decline. B, what is happening in the Pacific Northwest with Democratic mayors, governors experimenting with non-policing. And this is something that I want to go even beyond that, because people are seeing what we were talking about in the beginning, that this is about, hey, whether your country, United States, is good or it's bad inherently. Now, in either direction, you will have traces of the opposite and the contrast. Like if it's bad, there are obviously some good about it. If it's good, there are some bad about it. But the idea that you want to get rid of the entire system, you want to burn down everything, and you expect people to pay for it along the way because they're raising taxes. I just don't understand who can go along with it. But then the question is, how many people are aware of what is exactly going on? Because the Biden campaign are playing it very, very smartly. You know, Ben Shapiro today on Joe Rogan, he was talking about there's no way that you can be afraid of Biden because he's not even alive. How can you be afraid of a corpse?
I know the first reason that Weinstein said that the leftists were confiding in him, that is due to Biden's mental state.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense to you? Because if that is the case, let's just take that as a given. Wouldn't that just mean power shifts to the VP, whoever that is?
Absolutely. Well, that's why Biden is once in a lifetime opportunity for the extremists on that camp. That whoever is going to be the VP, Biden is basically a placeholder. He's not going to be in charge, because keep in mind, Biden is 78 and this is as good as he gets right now.
Yeah.
It's just going to get worse. And they're very aware of it. And it's really insane that some people are more than willing to throw the entire country under the bus, knowing this guy who you would not put in charge of taking care of your kids by himself, like babysit your kid by himself. Like he's lost. It's a shell of a human being. Unbelievable.
Okay, I'm going to call it right now. Biden is going to pick AOC as his VP because that would guarantee a win.
I don't think he can do it because AOC is not the age requirement of becoming the president.
Well, and she's just on the backside of plastic surgery. She's just coming in. No, she is. She got plastic surgery. Yeah, she had plastic. According to
she's getting ready for the election campaign trail, because
she has sort of her resting face is a bit of a frown. So the guess is that's what she had corrected. But that was on Scott Adams the other day. He was talking about that.
Well, she already is set to become the environmental advisor to the White House. He already talked about it. AOC is going to be in charge of the environment, which means no oil jobs, no gas jobs, no coal. He already said that Beto O'Rourke is going to be in charge of guns. And Beto O'Rourke is a person who said, of course, we're going to take away your AR-15 and AK-47s. What kind of a question is that? Of course, we're going to do it. And he's from Texas. And probably Elizabeth Warren is going to be in charge of Treasury. And it's a disaster. It's a disaster for absolute majority of American people and the Western civilization if the guy is elected. Yeah. But the reason I said I'm not as terrified as I was 2 months ago, I'm still very terrified about that prospect. But I'm not as terrified as I was maybe 2 months ago because I see the inner fighting within them. And they're shutting down speech. They're shutting down any kind of a debate because they know that they lose any kind of a debate for this exact same reason that China isn't allowing any kind of an open discourse.
Right.
So those are traces of hope, which is the point of this show.
So do you think Trump has a good chance
A winning?
this year? Yeah.
So there is on NPR, there is a money tracker of how much Trump and Biden have raised in the 2020 election. Let me try one more time and see if I can share it with you guys. This Zoom is not exactly my friend, probably because of the Chinese Communist Party, but we don't know.
They're listening in right
They're
now.
listening.
They're listening.
Hi. Oh,
There we go.
It's working.
So, money tracker, how much Trump and Biden have raised in the 2020 election. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard from the media that Biden has been consistently for the past 2 months over raising compared to Trump, which is complete nonsense, because if you come down, you see it's only one of Biden's PACs called Biden Victory Fund that's been out raising Trump. But the rest, and Trump had a head start, obviously. Trump has raised far more money than Biden. But what's really, really interesting is based on counties. Look at this map. This is from 2019, people who have given money to Trump campaign and Biden campaign. And you see on Trump, Los Angeles County is number one in giving Trump money. More than it's given to Biden. Los Angeles County, you would imagine that, and Los Angeles is one of those places that you would imagine, oh, they're like solid blue. They're all in favor of Democrats. But no, Miami-Dade is another interesting one with the amount of money that they've given to Trump. Broward County, which is the county that we're in, one of the infamous counties in Florida, solid blue, they've given more money to Trump than they've given to Biden. They've given more than $2 million, almost $2.5 million to Trump, less than $1 million to Biden. So,
what's the correlation like between funds and victory?
Well, they have obviously the ability to hire people on the ground, and
but historically, is there any correlation that we?
I don't know about that. That would be very interesting to see.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, in 2016, Hillary Clinton raised far more than Trump.
Right.
By a lot, and Trump ended up winning.
But Trump got far more free publicity.
Free publicity because they didn't take him seriously.
Yeah. Right.
So he does not have that advantage now. He does not have that surprise factor.
And now that the CPP have taken over Twitter and embedded their bots into it when they took it down there last week, God knows what'll happen to all Trump's tweets in the future.
Do you think it was the CCP? Because I'm also hearing it that they were patriots within Twitter, because one of the only accounts that was not touched was Trump's account.
Well, that was my initial response, because typically, 99% of the time it's done from the inside, something like that.
No, it was done on the inside.
It was definitely an inside job.
Yeah.
But they had an insider help them.
Yeah. Right. But I wasn't clear what the outcome of that was, David. Did you get any hint? Like,
no. Well, there was the Bitcoin scam, and
right.
the hackers made a few $100,000 before it was cut off.
Apparently, they didn't make it because Coinbase blocked those transactions.
Oh, okay.
They block transactions after a point, but ones that have been sent to the address, they cannot get back. That's the nature of Bitcoin. However, the speculation was that this was just a distraction for something more sinister, but I haven't heard any news on that front.
And that was my brain went right to that. It's too much of a coincidence that this happened this close to the election, and we know how important Twitter was to Trump. So I'm wondering if someone's trying to make Twitter less favorable.
Well, I mean, whatever the case is, I think this is very obvious that Twitter at this point is a matter of national security, Because if you can break into someone's account with that amount of influence, you can start World War III. Just imagine somebody in Twitter, some activists, get into Trump's account and they're like, been thinking a lot about it. Xi Jinping is not going along with my narrative. No longer my friend. I'll talk to him through Rocket Man or something like that.
Right.
What are you going to do about it? You know, it will be like a Doctor Strangelove kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
That, hey, that we just have an insane person. We're not actually sending you bombs. Well, we have to retaliate.
And YouTube seems to be going overtime now, shutting people down.
Yes.
With very little explanation.
YouTube is just ridiculous. And I'm saying it as somebody who has a YouTube account for a couple of years now and creating content. I just look at my subscriber number. It goes up by like 200 and comes down by 200. And this is like within an hour. And
wow,
they've deleted my videos, and I don't have like huge amount of subscribers or followers or anything. I'm shadow banned. I've been my account was suspended for 3 months last summer. But they're doing it very obviously. They don't even care anymore. It's not like they're doing it in a covert stealth kind of a way. They're just doing it. Yeah, this is what it is, man. You're not following the narrative. We're not going to favor you. Which
and Facebook. I'm sorry. Facebook's doing the same.
Yeah. Facebook, I mean, who knows? Who knows? Because Facebook supposedly is still a little playing on the fence.
Hopefully Peter Thiel sort of, kicks them every now and then.
Well, Peter Thiel is a very rational human being. His whole thing is that it's never the worst or the best kind of a scenario. And he's more of a... what's happening right now and what can I make out of it? It's really interesting to listen to him. He's one of the very few people who get a really good idea. He actually was a person maybe 7-8 years ago. They talked about Elon Musk, what you were talking about, that people are betting against him. I said never bet against Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's right. No, I was meaning more the fact that he's a major shareholder at Facebook.
Yeah, I think he's still on the board as well.
Yeah. So I wonder if he pokes them every now and then.
But I think they need to be made into public utilities like phones and electricity.
But I was reading up on it. Bill Clinton in the 90s said, okay, you guys need a break to get rolling. So you're not publishing houses. You get an exemption.
Right.
And all that has to be done is that exemption has to be taken away. No legislation, no change in the rules, just take the exemption away. And all of a sudden, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are all publishing houses responsible for their content.
Isn't that the executive order that Trump signed?
He's been trying, but I haven't seen it roll. I missed that if he has.
Yeah, I believe that he signed the executive order with respect to preserving free speech maybe on big tech platforms. But there is what you're talking about, I can't remember, something 35 or something like that. It's called that, yes, they're platforms, they're not publishers, therefore they're not responsible for what's being published.
But that's an exemption they got.
Yes, that's the exemption, and Facebook ruined their own chance and opportunity of making any kind of an argument in favor of their exemption by removing the Federalist from Facebook, making the argument that some of the comments put under your post were in violation of our terms of service. And that's what blew everything up. That, like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
It's the equivalent of I'm talking on a phone and they just shut me down because we don't like what you're talking about, basically.
Right.
So here is my solution. Break him apart, make him into public utility, put that entire database of big data into a blockchain database, and pay people for their data. Make people in this country shareholders of what they're creating. Now, the only person who's talking about this is Andrew Yang with respect to, he's calling it data dividend. When he said that, I was so happy because that's exactly what I was talking about with respect to UBI. UBI, I don't think it should be tax funded. I don't think it should be an extension of a welfare state, which is the far left wants to do it, progressives want to do it. It should be funded by user data. It will incentivize you to create more data. Data creation will become your job. You're making money. You're part of the system. And this entire thing will be a public interest rather than being just arm of the media, mainstream media, because that's what it is right now.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think Yang was right on the money with that. But to make that happen, if they're made publishing houses, or if they're responsible for their content again, then wouldn't it level the playing field and allow other people to come up? Because then their big advantage that they don't have to put any energy into policing their content, except, and I suppose they are putting a fair bit of energy into doing that at one level. But if they were truly responsible legally for the content on their sites, that would change how they could behave and what they could actually do. And it would let other groups come up. And then the people that offer that kind of a solution, where, okay, you're on our site, we'll give you a say in who's on the site with you. We'll give you a piece of the data that we start collecting, and you become a shareholder in the company. That could emerge. I'm always a little bit skeptical in my old age of legislating or requiring that sort of a solution. I think it has to happen from the grassroots.
There are already alternatives. Like BitChute is an alternative, for example, to YouTube. But it's just a matter of the amount of users and the amount of data that these users have already created. Hey, think of, for example, of the man who shall not be named, Alex Jones, who was removed overnight. In a and I don't even like Alex Jones. I think everybody should be able to say whatever they want to say, blah, 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 all of that. But the way that he was removed in a very coordinated kind of a manner, you are basically destroying someone's livelihood because you don't agree with the narrative that is being shared. And that he had millions and millions and millions of followers. Millions and millions and millions of dollars made for YouTube and Google because of his content. No, we just don't want you. Go away.
But so there's two solutions here, I'm hearing. I mean, I'm coming from the perspective, let's roll back, 40 years in time. And if you have stuff up, you're a publisher. That would be one. And the other solution is what I'm hearing you're saying is, no, you don't get to moderate or mediate the content. You're a utility.
Right.
So either you have to go one of those two ways, but we're in this bizarre middle ground right now because of the political interests.
I think we can do both of them. You make the publisher argument, and immediately after that, you raise a national security threat argument, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So you set the new starting point for whoever is coming next. Is it going to be Parler? Is it going to be BitChute? Is it going to be whoever? But at the same time, it is a national security threat, because this is not going to get any less complicated. And creating fake news, quote unquote, is not going to get any harder.
Well, this would almost be a good time to just poke the other fellow there and say, nationhood, national security, protecting a way of life, how does that fit in to a worldview where we don't have nations?
Let's hear it.
What do you mean we don't have nations?
Well, if we step away, in Canada's a nation, allegedly. Some would argue that, but
not Trudeau.
There are tribal components.
Yeah, we're post-national.
Yeah, but there's tribal components to our existence. human existence. There always have been tribal components. And our strength has been that we can gather together a whole bunch of tribes and agree on a common goal. And that sort of left us with nations. And we were
what's
starting.
Our common goal?
Pardon me?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. What's our common goal?
Well, that's what I'm putting on it. Our common goal would be food, production, sharing resources, providing services that other group can't provide.
You don't need a nation to provide food. Food was around long before nations.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't share it necessarily, or you didn't sell it back and forth. Yep.
People traded food before nations existed.
So what's the argument not to have nations? Like, how do you frame that?
At this point, right now.
Like, nations are a liability. We'd have nuclear wars if there weren't for nations. There would be trade wars if there weren't for nations.
We wouldn't have them, you think?
Is it nations or governments? If you get rid of governments and you have, let's say, because my argument, I don't think that you can get rid of governments, and I am not against anything that exists, because I think anything that exists for a reason, as a consequence of series of events and the behavior of the system and all of that. But I think, for example, in case of United States, government should be limited to the military. And I really can't think of anything else. That you just secure the borders and you guarantee this the security of people who are within that structure, and that's the amount of taxes that you pay to preserve that kind of a service, and that's about it. And you leave the rest to whatever kind of an option that can survive the free market competition.
Okay, what you just described is a protection racket.
What is that? Protection racket.
Yeah. So that's when organized crime moves in and says that you have to pay for our protection.
Yeah.
If you don't pay, your business will likely catch on fire. Shame about that.
Yeah, I don't think there is any way around that whatsoever. I think bigger you get, bigger share you have to pay to deal with bigger gangs, because government is the ultimate mafia.
Yeah, exactly. So
what's the option, though, David?
You don't think there's any way around this?
I think there is a way around the ethical arguments, that we don't need to have everything. We can have certain amount of things to provide safety and happiness and security and health and all of those things, but beyond that, it's a matter of greed. If you want to go and deal with that, then there are people who are greedier than you, and they have bigger guns and bigger ammos and bigger, more resources to take away from you and from everyone else for their own sake. But I go back to 2001 Space Odyssey, that the moment we have figured out how to use tools and weapons and anything, we used it first to provide for ourselves, and then second to take it away from the competitor, whoever that competitor might be. It's just the nature of humanity. I don't believe that if we don't have certain, I just call them safety nets. If we don't have that, we're just going to behave. I think people are as terrible as they are wonderful. And I think if you're not protecting ourselves in different ways, there are people who are just going to walk all over you because they have, again, bigger guns and more will and more ability to take over your resources.
Well, I don't doubt that you need physical protection from bad guys. I never denied that.
How do you implement that in as an alternative to a nation?
As an alternative to a protection racket?
Fair enough.
You could do it with a consortium of security forces that are all either for profit or charities.
Isn't that exactly the protection racket in a different way?
No, because they don't tax you. They don't force you to pay for them.
But you still have to pay.
Oh, you would likely pay somebody to protect you, just like.
And they can be overrun by a stronger force.
That's always the case.
Well, exactly.
Like,
what happened in Seattle? Were you following what happened in Seattle?
You do need to have a stronger force than people that invade you.
Yeah, that's my whole point.
I agree, but I don't think you have to run a protection racket to get that stronger force.
So rather than have a government and all the huge financial burden that encompasses, you have private companies.
You have private security forces, and those private security forces are part of a consortium that makes the rules, and all the private companies pay into the consortium to keep it going.
Right.
And if any of them breaks the rules, then they get kicked out of the consortium.
Well, who will own the nuclear weapons? Because they exist right now already. That's what I'm talking about, that right now. What are our options? Because what happened in Seattle with respect to...
this can't change overnight.
No.
You'd have to probably dismantle the nuclear weapons over a period of decades.
Exactly. If not centuries.
Yeah, it could be a long time.
What happened in Seattle? I was actually thinking about you, because that's something we can talk. I think we should move towards wrapping this up, but that is something maybe we can talk next time that we come together. But I was thinking about it because they called it CHAZ at first, which was Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
Yes, I remember CHAZ.
The first thing they did, they built a border with walls. Yep. The second thing they did...
guards.
Yeah, exactly. The second thing they did, they created their own police force, beating people down, shooting people, interrogating them. And then they changed their name to CHOP, which was Capitol Hill Occupying Protest, because they thought of it, hey, if we're autonomous, how are we going to get water? How are we going to get electricity? Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with you on the ethical, and we had this conversation before, on the ethical sense of a way, but practically, I think it's not going to happen because of human nature, because we already have massive weapons already that exist on this planet. And even if people, that's one of the reasons I never agreed with the Iran nuclear deal. I don't care how many paper they're going to sign that they're not going to build a nuclear bomb. If they can't build a nuclear bomb, they're going to build a nuclear bomb. And for as long as this, which I think is an inseparable part of human nature, that you just want to have more and more control over resources, and that's why we progress, but at the same time that's why we cause a lot of trouble for each other and pain, because we are hardwired in just gathering more and more and more and more without really knowing why do we need all of these stuff, and putting everybody and including ourselves into a bigger kind of problems and continuous kind of problems.
I genuinely like what David's saying, and I get it, and I understand what you're saying, that how do we get there?
Maybe we can establish smaller communities based on that principles.
Yeah, sure, that's the way to do it, is just imagine dividing up every state into counties and every county into city-states, and get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, decentralized as decentralized as it gets.
Yeah.
And maybe regions like the West Coast and the East Coast have more in common to function as an entity than forcing the East-West trade that the nation states. But my concern, and maybe the solution, lies in the fact that, and you said it, Aga, that we're totally dependent on government now. It is the ultimate, as David says, it's the ultimate racket.
Yep.
Every aspect of our life is controlled. We're told You got to do this, you got to wear a mask, you're going to have a vaccination, you got to do this, you can't open this, you can't close that. I mean, it's been really clearly shown how much the government puts on the table that you have to do. So I think, the FDA, the environmental agencies, for example, no need, the agricultural agencies, subsidizing farmers, all that stuff, I think it can be tossed by the wayside. And then you're left with initially just military, the justice system, and then the policing falls back to the lower municipalities.
Yeah.
And at that point, you move forward, right?
And I think there is also a deeper layer at the core of governments. And that's, I think, where worth discussing, that United States government, its sole job is to protect the U.S. Constitution. And the rights in the U.S. Constitution are not coming from the man, it's coming from the God. Now, what kind of a God, who that God is, that's a different kind of a story. But I think that's the whole point of American exceptionalism, that when the First Amendment is providing and guaranteeing your free speech, that is not the right that is given to you by man. That is your natural right that is recognized by this legal document. And the job of the government of the United States is to protect that. Versus job of the Chinese Communist Party government is the man setting all the laws and all the rules, and everybody else should follow them. And that is exactly going back to what Zizek said. That is the moment of philosophy that is created right now, this opportunity for all of us to discuss.